The glass tower of Helios Dynamics stood like a monument to ambition against the gray Seattle sky. But inside the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor, panic had reduced grown men to chaos. Victoria Hale, the CEO, whose face graced the covers of business magazines, stood frozen at the head of the conference table, watching her company's future collapse in real time. The massive display screen showed nothing but error messages, red text cascading like blood across black backgrounds. In exactly 4 hours, senators, military brass, and international investors would gather in the auditorium downstairs, expecting to witness the unveiling of Project Sentinel, a $100 million AI server system that would secure Helios Dynamics' dominance for the next decade. Instead, they would witness catastrophic failure unless someone could resurrect a machine that 12 of the country's finest engineers couldn't fix. But no one was watching the hallway. No one noticed the quiet man in the gray maintenance uniform pushing a cleaning cart past the glass wall, his eyes flickering toward the screen for just a moment before he continued on his way. That man was Caleb Moore, and he was invisible by design. If you want to know how a janitor saved a billion-dollar company and reclaimed the life he'd sacrificed, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The fluorescent lights in the executive boardroom cast harsh shadows across 12 exhausted faces. Victoria Hale had called an emergency meeting at 5 in the morning, and every senior engineer at Helios Dynamics sat around the mahogany table looking like soldiers who'd just lost a battle they didn't understand. "Run it again," Victoria said, her voice tight with controlled fury. She was 48 years old, with silver streaks in her dark hair that she'd earned through 2 decades of clawing her way to the top of the tech industry. She hadn't built Helios Dynamics from a garage startup into a government contractor worth billions by accepting failure. From the beginning. Tell me exactly what happened. Marcus Chen, the chief technology officer, stood at the display screen with his tablet, his tie loosened and his eyes red from a sleepless night. At 2:47 a.m., the primary AI server cluster began reporting thermal anomalies. We ran standard diagnostics. Everything checked out. Then at 3:15, the entire system crashed. We've been trying to reboot for the past 2 hours. And? Victoria's fingers drummed against the table. And nothing works. Marcus's voice cracked slightly. Every restart attempt fails at the same point. The system detects a critical thermal overload and shuts down automatically. We've checked the cooling systems 3 times. The temperature readings are normal. The hardware is fine, but the server thinks it's melting. Jennifer Kwan, the lead systems architect, leaned forward. It's reading phantom heat signatures, like the sensors are lying to the AI. Sensors don't lie, snapped David Armstrong, the hardware specialist. Your code is misinterpreting the data. My code is perfect, Jennifer shot back. Your sensors are feeding garbage. Victoria raised her hand and silence fell immediately. I don't care whose fault it is. I care about solutions. We have 4 hours until the demonstration. 4 hours until senators and generals and investors walk into that auditorium expecting to see the most advanced AI defense system in the world. What am I going to show them instead? A very expensive paperweight? No one answered. Outside the conference room, Caleb Moore pushed his cleaning cart down the hallway, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished marble floor. He wore the same uniform he'd worn for the past 3 years. Gray work pants, a gray shirt with maintenance embroidered over the pocket, and comfortable shoes that could handle 12 hours of walking. His ID badge hung from a lanyard around his neck, featuring a photo that made him look even more forgettable than he actually was. The executive floor was usually empty at this hour, which was exactly why Caleb's shift started at 5 a.m. He could clean the offices and conference rooms before the executives arrived, remaining invisible, unnoticed, unbothered. That's how he preferred it. He stopped his cart outside the boardroom, pulling out his spray bottle and microfiber cloth. The glass walls were always covered with fingerprints by the end of the day, and he'd learned to clean them early before anyone complained. As he sprayed the glass, he could hear the voices inside clearly. What about the backup systems? Victoria was asking. Same problem, Marcus replied. We tried routing through the secondary server array. Same thermal errors. It's like the entire network is hallucinating a fire that doesn't exist. Caleb's hand paused mid-wipe. He stared at the error messages on the display screen, his mind automatically parsing the data, even though he'd trained himself not to care about such things anymore. Red numbers, temperature readings, pressure indicators, thermal management protocols. He knew those numbers. He'd seen systems like this before, in another life, when he wore a different uniform and his opinions mattered. The backup thermal sensor, Subnet C, pressure differential feedback loop. The answer appeared in his mind like muscle memory, clear and certain. He could see the flaw in the architecture from here, through a glass wall, just by glancing at error codes he shouldn't understand. It was a design oversight so obvious it almost hurt. The kind of mistake that happened when brilliant engineers built complex systems in isolated teams without talking to each other. But Caleb Moore was a janitor. Janitors didn't solve engineering problems. Janitors cleaned up other people's messes and went home. He returned to wiping the glass, his movements methodical and precise. Inside the room, the argument continued. "We need to postpone the demonstration," Jennifer said. "There's no way we can fix this in 4 hours." "Postponement isn't an option," Victoria's voice was ice. "Do you understand what's at stake here? The Department of Defense has given us one window to prove Project Sentinel works. One. If we ask for a delay, they'll interpret it as incompetence. We have competitors who would kill for this contract. We cannot show weakness." "Then we're going to fail in front of everyone," David muttered. "Unacceptable." Victoria stood, her hands flat on the table. "I need options, real options, not excuses." Caleb finished the glass and moved his cart down the hallway. He could still hear them as he walked away, their voices rising and falling in waves of frustration. He tried not to care. He'd learned not to care about a lot of things in the past 3 years. The elevator took him down to the 38th floor, where he began his routine cleaning of the senior management offices. He worked with practiced efficiency, emptying trash cans, dusting surfaces, vacuuming carpets. His mind tried to stay focused on the task at hand, but the error messages kept replaying in his memory. Subnet C, the backup sensor in the thermal management array. It was feeding false positive pressure readings into the main AI controller, creating a phantom overload condition. The fix would take maybe 20 minutes if someone knew where to look, but they didn't know where to look. And he was just the janitor. Caleb pulled out his phone and checked the time. 6:15. His son, Owen, would be waking up soon. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had agreed to get Owen ready for school and walk him to the bus stop, but Caleb always called to say good morning. It was their routine, one of the small rituals that held their life together. He found an empty office and dialed home. Owen answered on the second ring. "Dad? Hey, buddy, just wanted to hear your voice before you head to school." "Mrs. Chen is making me eat oatmeal again." Owen was 8 years old with his mother's dark eyes and Caleb's stubborn streak. "She says it's brain food, but it tastes like glue." Caleb smiled despite everything. "Put some brown sugar in it, that's the secret." "She won't let me. She says sugar makes me hyper." "Then suffer through it like a brave warrior. How's the science project coming?" "Almost done. I just need to write the conclusion part. Can you help me tonight?" "Absolutely. I'll be home by 4. We'll knock it out together." "Okay. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Owen. Have a great day at school." Caleb ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. For a moment, he stood in the empty office, looking out at the Seattle skyline. Rain streaked down the windows, blurring the city into watercolor grays and blues. He thought about the conversation he'd overheard, about the panic in those engineers' voices, about the $100 million problem they couldn't solve. Then he thought about Owen, waiting at home with his science project and his dreams of becoming an astronaut. He thought about the carefully balanced life they'd built together, the fragile stability that depended on Caleb staying invisible, staying safe, staying away from the complications that came with being someone who mattered. He returned to his cart and continued cleaning. By 7 a.m., the executive floor was filling with arriving staff. Caleb had learned to navigate around them, timing his movements to avoid conversation. He was good at being furniture, present but unnoticed, necessary but unimportant. He was wiping down the coffee station outside the boardroom when he heard Victoria's voice again, sharper now, edged with something that might have been desperation. "I want every engineer we have on this. Cancel their other projects. I don't care if it's all hands on deck. We fix this or we all start updating our resumes. Through the glass wall, Caleb could see the room had filled with more people. The entire engineering department seemed to be crammed inside, all focused on the massive display screen where those same error messages still cascaded in red. Marcus was at a laptop, his fingers flying over the keys. We've isolated the thermal management system, running a deep diagnostic now. How long? Victoria asked. 30 minutes for a complete scan. We don't have 30 minutes. The investors are already in the building. The demonstration starts at 10. Jennifer stepped forward, tablet in hand. We could run a surface-level override, force the system to ignore the thermal warnings. And if there's an actual thermal problem, David challenged, we could fry $100 million worth of hardware in front of a live audience. There is no thermal problem, Jennifer insisted. The readings are false. We all know it. Knowing it and proving it are different things. Caleb set down his spray bottle. His heart was beating faster than it should have been. His hands felt restless. Just walk away. It's not your problem. But he'd spent 3 years cleaning these offices. 3 years invisible among the brilliant minds of Helios Dynamics, and he'd never once felt the pull to step forward. He'd never once been tempted to break his carefully constructed anonymity. Until now. Maybe it was the desperation in Victoria's voice. Maybe it was the sight of so many intelligent people trapped by a problem he could solve in his sleep. Maybe it was just fatigue from pretending he was less than he actually was. Or maybe, somewhere deep down, he was tired of being invisible. Caleb walked to the glass door of the conference room. He raised his hand, and he knocked. The room fell silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the door, toward the janitor standing in the hallway with his cleaning cart and his forgettable face. Victoria frowned. We're in a meeting. Caleb's throat was dry. This was insane. He should apologize and leave. He should protect the life he'd built, the safety he'd created for Owen. Instead, he heard himself say, I know how to fix it. The silence deepened. Someone laughed. A short, disbelieving sound quickly stifled. Victoria's frown intensified. Excuse me? Your AI server, Caleb said, his voice steadier than he felt. I know why it's crashing, and I know how to fix it. Marcus stood up from his laptop, his expression somewhere between confusion and annoyance. Who are you? Maintenance, Caleb said simply. This is a closed technical meeting, David said. We don't need... Let him speak. Victoria's voice cut through the room like a blade. She was looking at Caleb with an intensity that made him want to step back, but he held his ground. You said you know what's wrong with our server? Yes. And you are? Caleb Moore, night shift maintenance. Victoria walked toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor. She was shorter than he'd expected, maybe 5'4", but she carried herself like someone much taller. Mr. Moore, do you have an engineering degree? No. Systems architecture certification? No. Any technical credentials whatsoever that would qualify you to diagnose a $100 million AI defense system? Caleb met her eyes. They were dark brown, sharp with intelligence and something else, a kind of desperate hope that she was trying very hard to hide. No, he said, but I can still fix it. Jennifer laughed outright this time. This is ridiculous. Victoria, we don't have time for... How? Victoria ignored Jennifer, her focus entirely on Caleb. How would you fix it? Caleb glanced at the display screen. Your backup thermal sensor in subnet C is feeding false pressure differential data into the main AI controller. The sensor thinks it's detecting a dangerous pressure buildup in the cooling system, so it's triggering automatic shutdown protocols to protect the hardware. But the pressure readings are wrong because the sensor is calibrated for a different ambient atmospheric pressure than what you're actually running. The room had gone completely still. Marcus slowly sat back down. How could you possibly know that? The error messages, Caleb said. They're showing thermal warnings in the primary system, but if you look at the timestamps, the cascade starts in subnet C point 3 seconds before the main array reacts. That's your tell. The backup sensor is the trigger, not the symptom. David was staring at him like he'd started speaking in ancient Greek. Subnet C is a redundant failsafe. It shouldn't even be active unless the primary sensors fail. It shouldn't be, Caleb agreed. But someone programmed a monitoring loop that treats the backup sensor as an equal input source instead of a true failsafe. So when it reports false data, the AI doesn't know to ignore it. Jennifer had pulled up a different screen on her tablet, her fingers swiping rapidly. The backup sensor protocols are... Oh my God. He's right. There's a monitoring loop in the thermal management firmware. I didn't write this. Who wrote this? A younger engineer in the back raised his hand hesitantly. That was me. I added it last month during the security update. I thought having dual sensor validation would make the system more reliable. It made it more vulnerable, Caleb said gently. You created a scenario where one bad sensor can override good data. Victoria was still watching Caleb, her expression unreadable. And the fix? Recalibrate the subnet C sensor to match your actual operating environment, or disable the monitoring loop and let the backup sensor function as a true failsafe instead of an active input. Either solution would work. Marcus had pulled up diagnostic screens on 3 different laptops simultaneously. The calibration data is... Jesus. The sensor is set for sea-level pressure. We're on the 42nd floor. That's a significant enough difference to trigger false positives in a sensitive system. How long to recalibrate? Victoria asked. 15 minutes, Marcus said. Maybe less. Victoria checked her watch. She looked at Caleb, then at her engineers, then back at Caleb. Do it. Recalibrate subnet C and run a restart sequence. Wait, Jennifer said. We're taking advice from a janitor? We're taking advice from someone who diagnosed our problem in 30 seconds when 20 engineers couldn't solve it in 4 hours. Victoria's voice was cold. Unless you have a better solution? Jennifer fell silent. Marcus was already typing commands. 2 other engineers had moved to assist him, their earlier skepticism replaced by urgent focus. The room filled with the sound of rapid keystrokes and muttered technical jargon. Caleb stood in the doorway, suddenly aware that everyone was either staring at him or studiously avoiding looking at him. He felt exposed in a way he hadn't felt in years, like he'd stepped out of a protective shadow into harsh spotlight. Victoria gestured toward an empty chair. Sit down, Mr. Moore. I should get back to work. Sit. Down. Caleb sat. His cleaning cart waited in the hallway like an abandoned part of himself. The recalibration took 12 minutes. Caleb watched Marcus work, noting the precision of his commands, the way he double-checked every input before executing. These were good engineers, smart people who'd simply been looking at the problem from the wrong angle. Calibration complete, Marcus announced. Running restart sequence now. The room held its collective breath. The display screen went dark. Then lines of code began scrolling past. White text on black background. Diagnostic checks running in rapid succession, temperature readings, pressure indicators, system integrity checks. Green, green, green. The AI server cluster hummed to life, its status indicator shifting from red to amber to green in a cascade of success. The error messages disappeared, replaced by a simple notification. System online, all protocols nominal. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. The applause built until the entire room was celebrating, engineers shaking hands and hugging each other with relief that bordered on hysteria. Victoria didn't clap. She was still watching Caleb. Thank you, Mr. Moore, she said quietly, her voice cutting through the celebration. You just saved this company. Caleb stood. I should really get back to my cleaning. Not yet. Victoria turned to Marcus. Run a full diagnostic suite. I want confirmation that everything is stable before we bring in the audience. On it, Marcus said, already typing. Victoria gestured toward the hallway. Mr. Moore, walk with me. It wasn't a request. Caleb followed her out of the conference room, past his abandoned cleaning cart, down the hallway toward her private office. Other employees stared as they passed, clearly wondering why the CEO was walking side by side with a maintenance worker. Victoria's office occupied the corner of the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Seattle. Rain still streaked the glass, but breaks in the clouds revealed glimpses of blue sky. Her desk was organized chaos, stacks of reports, 3 computer monitors, a coffee mug that said failure is not an option. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it, arms crossed. Who are you really? I told you, Caleb Moore, maintenance. Maintenance workers don't diagnose AI defense systems. They don't know about subnet architecture or pressure differential calibration or firmware monitoring loops. Her eyes narrowed. You're not what you appear to be. Caleb said nothing. I'm going to ask you some questions, Victoria said, and I would appreciate honest answers. Not because I'm your employer, though I am, but because you just saved my company from catastrophic failure, and I'd like to understand why a man with your knowledge is pushing a cleaning cart. I like the work, Caleb said. It's steady, predictable. I can be home for my son. Your son? Owen, he's 8. Victoria walked to her desk and tapped a key on one of her monitors. Caleb Moore, hired 3 years ago through Apex Maintenance Services. Background check shows very little. No criminal record. No college degree, no previous employment in tech. She looked up. But that's not the whole story, is it? It's all you need to know. I disagree. Victoria sat in her chair, gesturing for Caleb to take the seat across from her. Here's what I think. I think you're former military or former aerospace. I think you worked on classified systems that required exactly the kind of knowledge you just demonstrated. And I think something happened that made you walk away. Caleb remained standing. Does it matter? It matters because I want to offer you a job. A real job. Senior systems engineer, minimum. Name your salary. I have a job. You have a disguise. Victoria leaned forward. Look, I don't know what you're running from or hiding from, and honestly, I don't care. What I care about is that you have skills this company desperately needs. You saw a problem that stumped my entire engineering department and solved it in less than a minute. That's not luck. That's expertise. I appreciate the offer, Caleb said, but I'm not interested. Why not? Because I need to pick up my son from school at 3:30. I need to help him with his homework. I need to make him dinner and make sure he does his reading and tuck him into bed. I need to be his father, not an engineer who occasionally shows up. Victoria was quiet for a moment. What happened to his mother? The question landed like a physical blow. Caleb's hands clenched at his sides. She died 4 years ago. I'm sorry. Me too. Caleb moved toward the door. If you'll excuse me, I have floors to clean. Wait. Victoria stood. Just wait, please. Something in her voice made him stop. I built this company from nothing, Victoria said. 20 years ago, I was coding in my apartment, surviving on ramen and ambition. I sacrificed relationships, health, sleep, everything to make Helios Dynamics succeed, and it did succeed, beyond my wildest dreams. She walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city. But there's something I learned too late. Success without balance isn't success at all. It's just hollowness wearing an expensive suit. What's your point? Caleb asked. My point is that I respect what you're doing, putting your son first, being present. That takes a different kind of courage than building companies or solving engineering problems. She turned to face him. But I also think you're punishing yourself, hiding who you are, pretending you're less capable than you actually are. And I wonder if that's really what's best for your son, watching his father diminish himself. Caleb felt anger flare in his chest. You don't know anything about me or my son. You're right, I don't. But I know talent when I see it. And I know waste. Victoria crossed her arms. So here's my offer. Think about it. Really think about it. If you change your mind, my door is open. I won't change my mind. Then thank you for saving the demonstration. You can go. Caleb opened the door, then paused. For what it's worth, the monitoring loop wasn't a bad idea. Your junior engineer was trying to add redundancy. He just implemented it wrong. With proper fail-safe protocols, dual sensor validation actually would make the system more reliable. Victoria smiled slightly. I'll pass that along. Caleb left, pulling the door closed behind him. He returned to his cleaning cart, which waited exactly where he'd left it. The hallway was empty now, the executives having returned to their offices or rushed off to prepare for the demonstration. He finished cleaning the executive floor, then moved on to the 37th, the 36th, working his way down the building in the methodical pattern he'd followed for 3 years. By 9:30, he was done. He returned his cart to the maintenance closet, clocked out, and took the elevator down to the lobby. As he walked through the main entrance, he saw people flooding into the building's auditorium, men and women in military uniforms, expensive suits, government badges. The demonstration was starting soon. Project Sentinel would either cement Helios Dynamics' future or destroy it, but that wasn't his problem anymore. Caleb caught the bus home, watching the city roll past through rain-streaked windows. He thought about Victoria's offer. He thought about the look on those engineers' faces when he'd solved their problem. He thought about the part of himself he'd buried 3 years ago, the part that understood complex systems and elegant solutions, the part that had once believed his work mattered. Then he thought about Owen, waiting at school, excited to show his father the science project they'd finished together tonight. And he knew, without question, that he'd made the right choice. Owen's school was a squat brick building in a neighborhood where the houses had small yards and the dreams were modest but stubborn. Caleb arrived at 3:15 and waited outside the main entrance with the other parents, most of whom he recognized by now. They nodded to him, the single dad, the quiet one, the guy who showed up every single day without fail. Owen burst through the doors at 3:30 exactly, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. His face lit up when he saw Caleb. "Dad." "Hey, buddy." Caleb ruffled Owen's hair. "Good day?" "Mrs. Patterson said my science project hypothesis was remarkably sophisticated." Owen beamed with pride. "I told her you helped me with it." "You did all the thinking. I just asked questions." They walked home together, Owen chattering about school while Caleb listened. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets shining and clean. When they reached their apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a building that had seen better decades, Owen immediately dumped his backpack and pulled out his project folder. "Okay, so I just need to write the conclusion," Owen said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "What should I say?" Caleb sat down across from him. "What did you learn from your experiment?" "That plants grow toward light even if you turn the pot around." "Why?" "Because of phototropism. The plant cells on the dark side grow longer, which makes the stem bend toward the light source." "So, what's your conclusion?" Owen thought for a moment, his face scrunching up in concentration. "That plants are smarter than they look?" Caleb smiled. "That's actually not bad. How about, this experiment demonstrates that plants possess biological mechanisms for detecting and responding to environmental light sources, suggesting that even simple organisms exhibit adaptive behaviors." Owen's eyes widened. "That sounds really smart." "That's because you did really smart work. Now write it in your own words." While Owen worked on his conclusion, Caleb made dinner, spaghetti with meat sauce, Owen's favorite. They ate together at the kitchen table, discussing plants and light and science. Later, they did Owen's math homework, read 2 chapters of the book Owen was reading for class, and played a game of chess that Owen won through a clever rook maneuver Caleb definitely didn't see coming. At 8:30, Owen was in bed, clean and tired and content. Caleb sat on the edge of the mattress, pulling the blanket up to Owen's chin. "Dad?" Owen asked sleepily. "Yeah?" "Mrs. Chen said you used to be an engineer. Is that true?" Caleb's heart stopped for a moment. "Where did you hear that?" "She said she remembers when we first moved in. She said you used to work with rockets or something." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "I did. A long time ago." "Why did you stop?" "Because something more important came along. Someone more important." "Me?" "You." Owen was quiet, processing this. Then, "Do you miss it? Engineering?" Caleb thought about the morning, about the conference room and the error messages, and the moment when his mind had solved the problem before he'd even decided to care. He thought about Victoria's offer, about the part of himself that still understood complex systems and elegant solutions. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I wouldn't trade what I have now for anything." "What if you could do both? Engineering and being my dad?" "That's not really how it works, buddy. Engineering jobs take a lot of time. They want you there all day, sometimes all night. I can't do that and still be here for you." Owen nodded, but he looked thoughtful. "Mom would want you to be happy, though, not just around." The words hit Caleb like a hammer to the chest. He had to take a breath before he could speak. You're pretty wise for 8 years old, you know that? I'm almost 9. 3 months away doesn't count as almost. Caleb stood, turning off the bedside lamp. Get some sleep. I love you. Love you too, Dad. Caleb closed the door softly and walked to his own room. But sleep felt impossible. He sat on the edge of his bed, thinking about everything Owen had said, everything Victoria had said, everything he'd felt in that conference room when his mind had come alive in a way it hadn't in years. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. This is Victoria Hale. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from HR. The demonstration was a complete success. Project Sentinel performed flawlessly. We secured the contract. None of that would have happened without you. Thank you. Caleb stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed a reply. Glad I could help. Good luck with everything? He almost hit send, but something made him pause. He deleted the message and wrote a different one instead. Your junior engineer who wrote the monitoring loop. Don't be too hard on him. His instincts were good. He just needs better mentorship. He sent it before he could second-guess himself. Victoria's reply came almost immediately. Noted. The offer still stands, by the way. If you ever change your mind. Caleb turned off his phone and lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the rain had started again, drumming softly against the windows. He thought about tomorrow's shift, about cleaning floors and emptying trash cans and being invisible. He thought about the choice he'd made 3 years ago, when his wife Sarah had been dying and the world had demanded he choose between career and family. There had been no real choice, not for him. Sarah had needed him. Owen had needed him. And after Sarah died, Owen had needed him even more. But Sarah was gone now. And Owen was growing up, becoming more independent every day. The little boy who'd needed constant supervision was becoming a young man who wanted to spend evenings reading on his own, building his own projects, having his own thoughts. Maybe Victoria was right. Maybe he was punishing himself. Maybe hiding who he was, pretending to be less than he actually was, wasn't protecting Owen at all. Maybe it was just teaching his son that sacrifice meant erasing yourself completely. Caleb closed his eyes, but he didn't sleep. He thought about servers and sensors and systems. He thought about solutions that appeared in his mind like muscle memory, knowledge that didn't fade just because you ignored it. He thought about the look on those engineers' faces when they'd realized the janitor was right. He thought about what it might feel like to matter again. Not instead of being Owen's father, but alongside it. Both things at once. And in the darkness of his room, listening to rain and breathing quiet air, Caleb Moore began to wonder if impossible choices were only impossible because he'd never let himself imagine a third option. The following morning arrived with the kind of gray Seattle drizzle that made everything look softer and sadder at the same time. Caleb stood in the maintenance locker room, pulling on his gray uniform and clipping his ID badge to his shirt. The other night shift workers filtered in around him, mostly middle-aged men and women who'd learned long ago not to ask each other too many questions about their lives before this job. Moore, his supervisor called from the doorway. Ray Hutchins was a barrel-chested man in his 60s who ran the night maintenance crew with the efficiency of a drill sergeant and the warmth of one, too. Need you on executive floors again tonight. They got some big meeting happening and want everything perfect. Sure thing, Caleb said, grabbing his equipment cart. And hey, Ray added, his voice dropping lower, I don't know what you did up there yesterday, but I got a call from someone in executive management saying you did good work, real good work. So whatever it was, keep it up. Caleb felt heat creep up his neck. Just cleaned some glass. Must have been some damn impressive glass cleaning. Ray clapped him on the shoulder. Seriously though, nice job. Makes the whole crew look good when one of us gets noticed. Caleb nodded and headed for the elevators, trying to ignore the curious looks from his coworkers. Word traveled fast in a building like this, even among people who supposedly didn't matter. He wondered how much Ray actually knew, how much anyone knew about what had happened in that conference room. The executive floor was quiet when he arrived, most of the offices dark except for the scattered glow of computer monitors left running overnight. Caleb began his routine, working methodically through each space. But when he reached the hallway outside Victoria's office, he found the lights on and voices drifting through the partially open door. He should have walked past, should have come back later when the office was empty. But something made him slow down, made him catch fragments of the conversation happening inside. The Pentagon is thrilled with the demonstration. That was Marcus Chen's voice. They're talking about expanding the contract to include naval applications. Good. Victoria sounded tired. What about the firmware update? I want that monitoring loop issue completely resolved. Already done. I had Mitchell, that's the junior engineer who wrote the original code, work with Jennifer to implement proper fail-safe protocols, the way the janitor suggested. There was a pause. Then Victoria spoke again, and her voice had changed, become something harder and more contemplative. His name is Caleb Moore, not the janitor, and I want to know everything about him. Everything? Marcus sounded puzzled. Why? He fixed the problem. We thanked him. What else is there? There's the question of how a maintenance worker diagnosed a complex AI system failure in 30 seconds when our entire engineering department couldn't solve it in 4 hours. There's the question of why someone with that level of expertise is pushing a cleaning cart at 5 in the morning. There's the question of what he's hiding and whether it matters to this company. You think he's corporate espionage? Jennifer's voice now sharp with suspicion. Someone planted to steal our technology? I think he's someone who doesn't want to be noticed, Victoria said. Which makes me want to notice him more. Marcus, I need you to dig into his background, quietly. No official channels. Just find out who Caleb Moore really is. Caleb's hands tightened on his cleaning cart. He should leave, right now, before they noticed him standing in the hallway like an eavesdropper. But his feet felt frozen to the floor. That feels invasive, Marcus said carefully. If the man wants privacy, the man has skills that could revolutionize our system's architecture, Victoria interrupted, and he's wasting them on janitorial work. I want to understand why. Call it curiosity. Call it due diligence. Call it whatever you want. Just do it. All right, Marcus agreed reluctantly, but if he finds out, this could backfire badly. Then make sure he doesn't find out. Caleb moved then, quickly and quietly, pushing his cart back down the hallway before anyone emerged from the office. His heart hammered against his ribs. They were going to investigate him, dig into his past, uncover the things he'd spent 3 years trying to leave buried. He found an empty office and pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He needed to think, needed to figure out what they might find and how bad it could get. His employment application had been sparse by design, just his name, address, and a work history that started 3 years ago with no explanation for the gap before that. Background checks for maintenance positions were minimal, mostly just criminal record verification. Nobody had cared where he'd come from or what he'd done before. But if Victoria wanted answers, if she had the resources of a billion-dollar company behind her curiosity, she'd find them. She'd discover that Caleb Moore had once been Dr. Caleb Moore, aerospace systems engineer with level 5 security clearance. She'd learn about the classified projects, the groundbreaking work on satellite guidance systems, the innovations that had earned him recognition from people whose names appeared in newspapers. And she'd learn about the choice he'd made when Sarah got sick, the career he'd walked away from, the bridges he'd burned when he refused to compromise on being present for his dying wife and their terrified child. Caleb leaned against the wall, pressing his palms against his eyes. He'd been so careful. 3 years of being nobody, of fading into the background, of building a small, quiet life where he and Owen could heal without the pressure of expectations or the weight of his former reputation. Now that carefully constructed anonymity was crumbling because he couldn't keep his mouth shut when he saw a problem he could fix. His phone buzzed, a text from Owen, even though it was almost 11 at night and the kid should have been asleep hours ago. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about the chess game. I should have moved my knight instead of my bishop. Would you have still won? Caleb smiled despite everything. He typed back quickly. Go to sleep, buddy. We can analyze the game tomorrow. And yes, I would have still won. I'm a chess master. You are not. I'm a dad. Same thing. Sleep. Now. Okay. Love you? Love you too. Caleb pocketed his phone and returned to work, trying to focus on the simple mechanical tasks of cleaning and organizing. But his mind kept circling back to Victoria's words, to the investigation she'd ordered, to the life he'd tried to leave behind, catching up with him whether he wanted it to or not. He finished the executive floor just before midnight and was heading to the elevators when he heard footsteps behind him. Mr. Moore. He turned. Victoria stood in the hallway, still dressed in her business suit despite the late hour. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, but her posture remained perfectly straight. "Working late?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I could ask you the same thing, though I suppose this is your normal shift." She walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "I wanted to apologize for earlier, for suggesting you were diminishing yourself. That was presumptuous. I don't know your story." "No, you don't." "But I'd like to." Victoria crossed her arms, not defensively, but as if she were hugging herself against cold. "Look, I'm not trying to invade your privacy. I see something in you, a kind of competence that's rare. And I know what it's like to hide parts of yourself because the world expects you to be something smaller than you are." "I'm not hiding," Caleb said. "I'm choosing. There's a difference." "Is there?" Victoria tilted her head. "Because from where I stand, choice implies freedom. And you don't seem free. You seem trapped in a role you've convinced yourself is noble." Anger flared hot in Caleb's chest. "You don't know anything about nobility. You don't know what I've sacrificed or why." "You're right. I don't. So tell me." "Why? So you can offer me a job again? So you can feel good about rescuing the brilliant janitor from his own choices?" Caleb took a step closer, and Victoria held her ground. "I don't need rescuing. I have exactly the life I want, a life where I'm home when my son needs me, where I don't miss bedtime because of emergency meetings or project deadlines, where I'm not torn between being a father and being an engineer. I chose this, deliberately, and I don't regret it." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said very softly, "Your wife, she died 4 years ago?" The question landed like a punch. Caleb's jaw tightened. "That's not your business." "Cancer? How do you—" "I Googled you after you left my office yesterday." Victoria's voice was gentle now, almost sad. "Found an obituary. Sarah Moore, aged 33, beloved wife and mother. Survived by husband Caleb and son Owen. In lieu of flowers, donations to the Leukemia Research Foundation." Caleb felt the walls he'd built around that pain start to crack. "Stop. I'm sorry, truly. I can't imagine what that was like." "Then don't try." His voice came out harsh, defensive. "Don't stand there pretending you understand what it means to watch someone you love fade away while doctors tell you there's nothing more they can do. Don't pretend you know what it's like to hold your child while he sobs because he wants his mother and you can't give her back to him." "You're right," Victoria said quietly. "I don't understand that, but I understand sacrifice. I understand making impossible choices, and I understand the difference between honoring someone's memory and punishing yourself in their name." Caleb turned away, his hands clenched into fists. "I need to get back to work." "She wouldn't want this for you," Victoria said. "Would she? A woman who loved you enough to marry you, to build a life with you. Would she want you to spend the rest of your existence making yourself smaller?" "You didn't know her." "No, but I know you saved my company yesterday. I know you have gifts that could change lives, advance technology, solve problems that matter. And I know you're wasting those gifts because you're afraid." Caleb spun back to face her. "Afraid of what?" "Of being someone who matters to anyone except your son. Of having obligations beyond your front door. Of building something significant and then losing it the way you lost Sarah." Victoria's eyes were steady, unflinching. "You're not protecting Owen by making yourself invisible. You're teaching him that love means erasing yourself. Is that really the lesson you want to pass on?" The words hit too close to home, echoing what Owen had said the night before about wanting Caleb to be happy, not just around. Caleb felt something shift inside him, some foundation crack that he'd thought was solid. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice raw. "I want you to consider the possibility that you could be both, a father and an engineer, present and significant, that those things aren't mutually exclusive." Victoria pulled a business card from her pocket and held it out. "Think about it. That's all I ask. Just think about it." Caleb stared at the card but didn't take it. "And if I say no?" "Then you say no. I'm not going to fire you or make your life difficult. You'll keep your maintenance job and I'll respect your decision." Victoria set the card on his cleaning cart. "But I hope you don't say no, because I think you could do remarkable things here. And I think you want to. I think part of you is desperate to. She walked away then, her heels clicking against the marble floor, leaving Caleb alone in the hallway with his cart and his confusion and a business card he didn't want to look at but couldn't ignore. He finished his shift in a daze, going through the motions without really registering what he was doing. When he finally clocked out and headed for the bus stop, the sky was just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. The city was quiet except for the occasional car passing by, headlights cutting through the mist. Caleb sat on the bus and stared out the window, thinking about everything Victoria had said. Thinking about Sarah, who'd been so fiercely proud of his work, who used to read his technical papers even when she didn't understand half the terminology because she loved watching him explain things he was passionate about. What would Sarah want? If she were here, if she could speak to him now, what would she say? The answer came easily, painfully. She'd tell him to stop hiding. She'd tell him that love didn't mean sacrifice alone. It meant showing up fully, completely, as your whole self. She'd tell him that Owen needed to see his father pursuing meaning, not just survival. But Sarah wasn't here, and the choices were Caleb's alone. He got home just as Mrs. Chen was arriving to help get Owen ready for school. She smiled at him from across the hallway, her arms full of grocery bags. "Good morning, Caleb. Long night?" "The usual." He unlocked his apartment door. "Thanks again for helping with Owen. I don't know what we'd do without you." "Nonsense. I love that boy like my own grandson." Mrs. Chen shifted her bags. "He was telling me yesterday about your old job. Engineering, yes?" He seemed very curious about it. Caleb's stomach tightened. "He mentioned that." "Smart boy. Asks good questions." Mrs. Chen's expression became more thoughtful. "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I remember when you first moved in. You were different then. Sadder, yes, but also, I don't know the word. More alive, maybe? Like part of you was still fighting. I was grieving. You still are, but now you're also hiding." She said it gently, without judgment. "I understand why. When my husband died, I did the same thing, made myself small, tried to need nothing, want nothing, thought that was strength." She shifted her grocery bags again. "But my daughter told me something wise. She said grief is not a reason to stop living. It's a reason to live better, to honor what we lost by not wasting what remains." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I'm not wasting anything. I'm raising my son." "Yes, you're doing that beautifully, but you could also be showing him what it means to be fully human, fully yourself." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Anyway, old woman talks too much. I'll check on Owen in an hour. Make sure he's up and ready." She disappeared into her own apartment, leaving Caleb standing in his doorway with too many thoughts crowding his mind. He went inside quietly, checking on Owen, who was still asleep in his bed, one arm thrown over his head, mouth slightly open. He looked so peaceful, so young, so completely dependent on Caleb to make the right choices. But what were the right choices anymore? Caleb showered and changed, then made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with Victoria's business card. Her direct line was printed in elegant font along with an email address. He turned the card over and over in his fingers, thinking about systems and sensors, about problems solved in 30 seconds, about the part of himself he'd locked away because it hurt too much to remember what he'd been capable of. His phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello? Mr. Moore? This is Marcus Chen from Helios Dynamics." Caleb's pulse quickened. "How did you get this number?" "From HR. Look, I apologize for calling you at home. I know it's early, but Victoria asked me to reach out to you about a potential opportunity." "I already talked to Victoria. I'm not interested." "I understand, but please, just hear me out for a minute." Marcus sounded earnest, almost pleading. "What you did yesterday, solving that server problem, that wasn't just impressive. It was the kind of intuitive systems thinking we've been trying to cultivate in our engineering teams for years. And I've been thinking about what you said, about the monitoring loop not being a bad idea, just badly implemented. What's your point?" "My point is that we have brilliant individual engineers, but we lack someone who can see the whole picture, someone who understands how different systems interact, someone with real-world experience integrating complex architectures." Marcus paused. Victoria wants to create a new position, Senior Systems Integration Architect. You'd basically be a consultant who reviews our major projects, identifies potential failure points, and helps teams communicate better across specializations. That sounds like a full-time job. It could be. Or it could be part-time. Flexible hours. Work from home when possible. Come into the office for key meetings. We'd structure it however you needed. Marcus's voice gained intensity. Look, I was skeptical yesterday when Victoria started talking about hiring you, but then I watched you work. The way you saw that problem, the clarity of your explanation, the respect you showed for Mitchell's attempt, even while correcting it, that's leadership. That's what we need. Caleb rubbed his eyes. I appreciate the offer, really, but my answer hasn't changed. Can I ask why? And I'm not trying to pressure you. I'm genuinely curious, because from my perspective, you have a gift, and gifts like that are meant to be used. I have a son who needs me. I have 3 daughters, Marcus said quietly. I understand. Believe me, I understand. But I also think there's a difference between being available and being present. My oldest daughter told me something last year that changed how I thought about work-life balance. She said the best gift I could give her wasn't my constant presence. It was showing her what it looked like to do work that mattered, to use my skills in service of something larger than myself. That's easy to say when you're not a single parent. You're right, it is, and I'm not trying to minimize what you're dealing with. Marcus sighed. Look, just think about it. Please, talk to your son. See what he thinks. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for. They understand more than we realize. I'll think about it, Caleb heard himself say, even though he'd meant to refuse outright. That's all I ask. Thank you, Mr. Moore. And for what it's worth, what you did yesterday mattered. You saved not just a contract, but hundreds of jobs. People who work here, who depend on Helios to support their families. You protected them. That's not nothing. Marcus hung up. Caleb sat in his kitchen, coffee growing cold in his cup, watching dawn light creep across the walls. He thought about Sarah, about Mrs. Chen's words, about Owen asking if he missed engineering. He thought about the way his mind had come alive in that conference room, the satisfaction of seeing a problem and knowing, just knowing, the solution. He thought about Victoria's question. Was he protecting Owen or teaching him that love meant erasing yourself? Owen emerged from his bedroom around 7, hair sticking up in all directions, still in his pajamas. Morning, Dad. Morning, buddy. Sleep okay? Yeah. Dreamed about chess. Owen padded to the refrigerator and pulled out orange juice. Are you going to work tonight? Same as always. Why? Owen shrugged, pouring juice into a glass. Just wondering. You look tired this morning. I'm fine. Dad? Owen turned to face him, and there was something in his expression that seemed older than 8 years should allow. Can I ask you something? Always. If Mom was still alive, would you still be an engineer? The question stole Caleb's breath. He stared at his son, trying to find words that wouldn't be a lie but wouldn't hurt either. I don't know, Owen. Maybe. Probably. But she's not alive, so it doesn't matter. But it does matter. Because you gave up something you loved. For me. Owen set down his juice glass. Mrs. Chen told me about when her husband died. She said she stopped painting because it made her too sad to do things she used to do with him. But then her daughter made her start again. And she said it hurt at first, but then it helped. Because painting reminded her of the good parts, not just the sad parts. Caleb felt tears prick at his eyes. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I just pay attention. Owen walked over and hugged him, his small arms tight around Caleb's waist. I don't want you to be sad forever, Dad. I want you to do things that make you happy, even if it means you're not home all the time. You make me happy. I know, but other things can make you happy too. It's okay. Owen pulled back, looking up at him with Sarah's eyes. Mom would say that, wouldn't she? Caleb pulled his son close again, holding him tight, feeling the weight of all the choices he'd made and all the choices he still had to make. Yeah, buddy, she would say that. They stood like that for a long moment, father and son, in the quiet kitchen of their small apartment, with the morning light spilling across them and the world waiting outside, full of possibilities neither of them had been willing to consider until now. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Moore allowed himself to wonder what it might feel like to be whole again. 2 days later, Caleb found himself standing outside Victoria Hale's office at 3 in the afternoon, wearing clothes that felt foreign after years in maintenance uniforms. He'd chosen simple, dark jeans, a button-down shirt, his only sport coat that still fit properly. Owen had insisted on helping him pick the outfit that morning, standing in front of Caleb's closet with the seriousness of a fashion consultant. "Not the blue shirt," Owen had said firmly. "The gray one. It makes you look smart." "I am smart." "Smarter, then." Now Caleb stood with his hand raised to knock, wondering if this was the biggest mistake he'd ever made or the first right decision in 3 years. Before he could decide, the door opened and Victoria appeared, tablet in hand, looking surprised. "Mr. Moore, you're early." "You said 3 o'clock." "I did, but in my experience, people are usually late." She stepped aside. "Come in." The office looked different in afternoon light, less imposing somehow. The rain had cleared and Seattle sprawled beyond the windows in unexpected sunshine. Victoria gestured to the chairs in front of her desk, but instead of sitting behind it, she took the seat next to him. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure either. Right up until I walked through the front door." Caleb folded his hands in his lap. "My son convinced me." "Smart kid." "Smarter than his father, apparently." Caleb took a breath. "Before we talk about anything else, I need you to understand something. Owen comes first, always. If there's ever a conflict between this job and being his father, I'm choosing him. No negotiation, no compromise, no guilt trips about company loyalty. That's the deal." Victoria nodded slowly. "I wouldn't respect you if you said anything different. And I need real flexibility. Not the kind companies promise in job descriptions but never actually deliver. I need to leave by 2:30 every day to pick him up from school. I need to be unreachable during homework time and dinner. I need sick days when he's sick, not when it's convenient for project deadlines." "Done." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Look, I could give you corporate speak about work-life integration and employee wellness initiatives, but the truth is simpler. You have skills I need, you have boundaries I respect. If those boundaries are what allow you to do the work, then they're non-negotiable." She paused. "Besides, I've spent 20 years watching brilliant people burn out because they couldn't say no. I'm tired of it. I'd rather have you here 20 hours a week fully present than 60 hours a week half alive." Caleb felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Okay, so what exactly would this job entail?" Victoria pulled up something on her tablet and handed it to him. "I had Marcus draft a proposal. Senior Systems Integration Architect. Your primary responsibility would be reviewing major projects at critical development stages, identifying potential integration failures, and facilitating communication between specialized teams. Think of it as being the person who sees the forest while everyone else is focused on individual trees." Caleb scrolled through the document. The scope was broader than he'd expected. Everything from AI defense systems to satellite communications to autonomous vehicle guidance platforms. "This is basically asking me to be fluent in a dozen different specializations." "You already are. That's what I realized when you solved the server problem. You didn't just understand thermal management. You understood how it integrated with AI decision protocols, with backup systems, with human error patterns. That kind of cross-disciplinary thinking is rare and valuable." "What about your existing engineering teams? How are they going to feel about some outsider showing up to critique their work?" "Some will resist. Some will welcome the help. Some will resent you until you prove yourself, then become your biggest advocates." Victoria took her tablet back. "But here's the thing, you won't be critiquing. You'll be collaborating. Your job isn't to tell people they're wrong. It's to ask questions they haven't thought to ask themselves. To spot connections they've missed, to prevent disasters before they happen." Caleb thought about Mitchell, the junior engineer whose monitoring loop had caused the server crash. Thought about the way a well-intentioned attempt at redundancy had created a critical vulnerability because nobody had considered the edge cases. "And when I do spot problems, when I have to tell a team their approach is fundamentally flawed, you do it the way you did with Mitchell. You acknowledge the good intention, explain the flaw clearly, and help them find a better solution." Victoria met his eyes. I watched you in that conference room. You could have made that kid feel like an idiot. Instead, you made him feel like a promising engineer who'd made an instructive mistake. That's leadership. I'm not a leader. I'm a guy who used to be good at his job before he walked away. You're a father raising a child alone while working nights to make ends meet. You're absolutely a leader. Victoria stood and walked to the window. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you, Mr. Moore. I see someone who made an impossible choice and lived with the consequences without complaint. Someone who sacrificed prestige and recognition because something more important needed protecting. Someone who could have stayed bitter and broken, but instead built a quiet life focused on what actually mattered. She turned back to face him. That's the kind of person I want influencing my company culture. Not just because you're technically brilliant, but because you understand what it means to have priorities beyond profit. Caleb felt uncomfortable under the weight of her assessment. You're romanticizing. I didn't make some noble sacrifice. I just did what any parent would do. Except most don't. Most find ways to convince themselves their career matters more, or they split custody and prioritize the job during their time, or they hire nannies and tell themselves quality time matters more than quantity. Victoria's voice was soft but firm. You actually walked away. Completely. That took courage most people don't have. It took desperation. There's a difference. Is there? Victoria returned to her seat. Here's what I'm offering. 25 hours a week, flexible schedule, work from home when possible. Salary of $160,000 annually, full benefits, stock options. You set your own hours as long as you're available for critical meetings and deliver on project reviews. We'll start with a 3-month trial period. If it's not working for either of us, you walk away with no hard feelings, and I write you a recommendation letter that'll get you hired anywhere you want. The numbers made Caleb's head spin. He was currently making $32,000 a year as a janitor. This was more money than he'd made even at the peak of his aerospace career. That's too much. It's market rate for your skill level. Actually, it's below market rate, but I'm betting you care more about flexibility than maximum compensation. I do, but no buts. This is what the job is worth. This is what you're worth. Victoria pulled out a contract and set it on the table between them. Take it home. Read it carefully. Have a lawyer review it if you want. Think about it. Talk to your son. And if you decide you want to try, sign it and bring it back. Caleb stared at the document like it might bite him. What if I fail? What if I'm not as good as you think I am? Then we'll figure it out together. But I don't think you'll fail. Victoria smiled slightly. You know what my biggest fear is? That you'll succeed beyond anything you've imagined and realize you could be doing this anywhere, for anyone. That 3 months from now, I'll get a call from Boeing or SpaceX or some defense contractor offering you twice what I'm paying. That's my actual concern. That's not going to happen. Why not? Because I don't care about prestige or recognition anymore. I care about being home for dinner. I care about helping with homework. I care about showing my son that work can be meaningful without consuming your entire life. Caleb picked up the contract, feeling the weight of all it represented. If I do this, it's not a stepping stone to something bigger. It's the thing itself, this job, this balance, this life. That's all I want. Victoria extended her hand. Then I think we understand each other perfectly. Caleb shook her hand, and something in that gesture felt like stepping through a door he'd thought was locked forever. Not back to his old life, but forward into something new, something he'd never considered possible. He left Helios Dynamics at 3:45, the contract in a folder under his arm, and headed straight to Owen's school. He was late for pickup, but Mrs. Patterson, Owen's teacher, had agreed to keep him until Caleb arrived. When he walked into the classroom, he found Owen at a desk working on math problems while Mrs. Patterson graded papers. "Dad!" Owen jumped up, gathering his things. "How'd it go?" "I'll tell you on the way home." Caleb thanked Mrs. Patterson and they headed out into the afternoon sunshine. "What would you say to getting ice cream?" "Really? On a Wednesday?" "Special occasion." They walked to the ice cream shop 3 blocks from their apartment, a little place with a striped awning and an owner who knew Owen's usual order by heart. They sat at one of the small outdoor tables, Owen with his chocolate chip mint cone, Caleb with plain vanilla. "So," Owen said between licks, "did you take the job?" "Not yet. I have to read the contract first and make sure I understand everything. But probably. Caleb watched his son's face. How would you feel about that if I wasn't home as much during the day? Owen considered this seriously. Would you still pick me up from school? Every day? Would you still help with homework? Absolutely. Would you still make spaghetti on Fridays? That's non-negotiable. Then I think it's good. Owen caught a drip before it could run down his hand. Mrs. Chen said when people use their talents, they're happier. And happy people are better parents than sad people who are around all the time. Mrs. Chen says a lot of things. She's usually right, though. Owen looked at him with those two wise eyes. Are you scared? The question caught Caleb off guard. Yeah, buddy. I'm terrified. Why? Because I've been doing the same thing for 3 years. Safe things, predictable things. This is different. It's stepping back into a part of my life I thought was over. It's risking failure. It's being seen again instead of invisible. But you like being seen, Owen said. I could tell. When you talk about fixing that computer problem, your whole face changes. You look like you do when we build model rockets together, like you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Caleb felt his throat tighten. How'd you get so smart? Good genetics, Owen grinned, and a pretty good dad. They finished their ice cream and walked home slowly, talking about school and chess and the science fair coming up in 2 months. When they reached their apartment, Caleb made dinner while Owen did homework at the kitchen table, the familiar rhythm of their evenings unchanged despite everything shifting beneath the surface. That night, after Owen was asleep, Caleb sat down with the contract. He read every page carefully, making notes in the margins, looking up terms he didn't understand. The more he read, the more real it became. This wasn't a fantasy or a what-if scenario. This was an actual offer with actual terms, representing an actual chance to rebuild a part of himself he'd thought was lost. His phone rang around 10. Marcus Chen. I hope I'm not calling too late, Marcus said. I'm up, reading the contract. Any questions? Concerns? About 100, but mostly about the practical logistics. How does this actually work? Do I show up Monday morning and start reviewing projects? Do people even know I'm coming? Marcus laughed. No and yes. We'd start with an orientation week. You'd meet the team leads, get briefed on current major projects, establish communication protocols. Then we'd assign you to your first integration review, probably the satellite guidance upgrade we're doing for a commercial client. Low stakes, relatively straightforward, good way to build credibility before tackling the harder stuff. Low stakes in your world is probably still pretty high stakes in reality. Fair point, but we'd support you. I'd be your primary point of contact. Victoria wants weekly check-ins, and we'd set you up with an office, though you're welcome to work from home most days. An office? The concept felt alien. I've been cleaning offices for 3 years. Now I'm going to have one. Strange how life works, isn't it? Marcus paused. Look, I know this is a big transition, and I know you have reservations, but I want you to know something. That server problem you solved? That wasn't luck. Jennifer and I went back through the diagnostic logs afterward. The error pattern was there from the beginning. Every single one of us looked at it and missed what you saw immediately. That's not just knowledge. That's instinct. That's the kind of thing you can't teach. Or maybe I just got lucky spotting the right detail at the right moment. Maybe. Or maybe you're exactly as good as Victoria thinks you are, and you're just afraid to believe it. Marcus's voice was kind. I've been in this industry for 20 years. I've worked with brilliant engineers who couldn't see past their own specialization. You saw the whole system in 30 seconds through a glass wall while pushing a cleaning cart. That's not normal, Caleb. That's exceptional. After they hung up, Caleb sat in the quiet darkness of his living room, thinking about everything Marcus had said, thinking about the version of himself who'd existed 4 years ago, confident and capable, before grief had taught him to be small. Thinking about the version of himself who'd existed for the past 3 years, invisible and safe, convinced that smallness was the price of presence. And thinking about the version of himself who might exist starting next week, whole again, using skills that had been dormant, showing his son what it looked like to be fully alive instead of just fully available. He picked up a pen and signed the contract. The next morning, Caleb called Ray Hutchins and gave his 2 weeks' notice. Ray was silent for a long moment after Caleb explained he'd been offered an engineering position with Helios. An engineering position, Ray repeated slowly, at Helios Dynamics. Yes. The company you've been cleaning for 3 years. Yes. More, what the hell? You've been qualified for an engineering job this whole time and you've been pushing a mop? Caleb didn't know how to explain without making it sound like he'd been lying by omission. I had my reasons. Must have been some damn good reasons. Ray sighed. Well, I hate losing you. You're the most reliable guy on my crew, but I'm not going to pretend you belong here when you obviously don't. Congratulations, I guess. Weird as this situation is. Thanks, Ray. I appreciate everything. Yeah, just promise me something. What? Don't forget about the people who clean your office when you're some hotshot engineer. They're people too. They got stories, same as you. The words landed hard. I won't forget. I promise. Caleb spent his final 2 weeks on the night shift saying goodbye to colleagues who'd become familiar faces, if not quite friends. They were all puzzled by his sudden departure, but most were genuinely happy for him. A few seemed hurt, like he'd been lying to them by not mentioning his capabilities, but mostly they just shrugged and wished him well, the way people do when someone moves on to something better. On his last night, Caleb walked through the executive floors one final time, not cleaning but simply observing. He thought about all the conversations he'd overheard, all the problems he'd noticed but not solved, all the times he'd made himself invisible when he could have spoken up. He thought about the safety of that invisibility and the cost of it too. He stopped outside the conference room where he'd knocked on that glass door and changed everything. The lights were off now, the display screens dark, but he could still see it in his memory, the cascading error messages, the desperate engineers, the moment he'd decided to step forward instead of walking away. What would have happened if he'd kept walking? If he'd stayed safe and silent and invisible? Nothing, probably. They would have found a different solution eventually, or they wouldn't have, and the contract would have failed, and hundreds of people would have lost their jobs, and Caleb would have gone home to Owen none the wiser, secure in his small, careful life. But he hadn't kept walking, and that choice had led him here, to his last night as a janitor and his first step towards something he couldn't quite name yet, but desperately wanted to believe in. His first day as senior systems integration architect began on a Monday morning with Owen insisting on taking a photo. For the records, Owen explained, positioning Caleb in front of their apartment building. So when you're famous, we'll have proof of how it started. I'm not going to be famous. You might be. Mrs. Chen says you're going to change the world. Mrs. Chen needs to stop filling your head with nonsense. But Caleb smiled for the photo anyway, wearing his gray shirt and dark pants, carrying a leather bag he'd bought specifically for this job. Owen snapped the picture, then hugged him tightly. You're going to be great, Dad. Thanks, buddy. I'll pick you up at 3:30, like always. I know you will. Caleb took the bus to Helios Dynamics, but this time, instead of heading to the maintenance entrance in the basement, he walked through the main lobby. The security guard who'd waved him through every morning for 3 years barely glanced at him now that he wasn't in a gray uniform. He rode the elevator to the 35th floor, where the engineering department sprawled across an open floor plan of workstations and glass-walled meeting rooms. Marcus met him at the elevator. Welcome aboard. Ready for the grand tour? As ready as I'll ever be. Marcus introduced him to what felt like 50 people in the first hour. Engineers, project managers, administrative staff, all of whom looked at Caleb with varying degrees of curiosity and skepticism. He recognized some of them from his cleaning days, though none of them seemed to recognize him. The invisibility had worked both ways. His office was small but bright, with a window overlooking the city and a desk that had clearly been set up specifically for him. 2 computer monitors, a tablet docking station, a phone with too many buttons. Marcus walked him through the system's access, the project management software, the communication protocols. Your first assignment is the satellite guidance upgrade I mentioned, Marcus said, pulling up files on one of the monitors. The team has been working on it for 8 months. They're approaching final integration testing. Your job is to review the architecture, attend their status meetings, and identify any potential failure points before we commit to production. When's the first meeting? Tomorrow at 9. I'll be there with you for the first few. Marcus leaned against the desk. Fair warning, the lead engineer on this project is David Armstrong. You met him during the server crisis. He's brilliant but territorial. He might not love having someone review his work. The hardware specialist who was arguing with Jennifer? That's the one. He's been with Helios for 12 years, very set in his ways, but he's also responsible for some of our most successful systems. If you can win him over, the rest of the team will follow. Caleb spent the morning reviewing technical documentation, trying to reorient his brain to thinking like an engineer again instead of a janitor. It was like stretching muscles that had atrophied, painful and exhilarating at the same time. By lunch, his head was spinning with specifications and schematics. He ate alone in his office, looking out at Seattle spread below him. This view had existed the whole time he'd been cleaning these floors, but he'd never stopped to appreciate it. Now it felt like a metaphor for everything, the beauty that existed just beyond the edges of what he'd allowed himself to see. His phone buzzed, a text from Owen's school. His heart jumped, but it was just a reminder about the upcoming science fair. He replied confirming he'd received it, then sent Owen a quick message. First day going okay. Can't wait to hear about yours tonight. Owen's response came immediately. Good luck, Dad. You got this. The afternoon brought more meetings, more introductions, more information than Caleb could possibly absorb in one day. By the time 3 o'clock rolled around, he was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. His brain felt overloaded, stuffed full of data and names and expectations. But he left the office at 2:30, just as he'd promised himself, and arrived at Owen's school right on time. Owen ran out with his usual enthusiasm. How was it? Tell me everything. They walked home together, Caleb describing the office and the people in the projects. Owen listened with the intensity of someone who understood that this mattered, that his father was rebuilding something important. Do you like it? Owen asked as they climbed the stairs to their apartment. Caleb thought about that, about the way his mind had engaged with problems again, the way solutions had appeared like old friends returning, about the fear and the excitement and the feeling of stepping back into a part of himself he'd thought was dead. Yeah, he said, surprised by how true it was. I really do. That night, over spaghetti and garlic bread, they talked about Owen's day and the science fair project and whether chess was more strategy or tactics. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb felt like he was doing more than just surviving. He was building something. Not instead of being Owen's father, but because of it. Showing his son through actions instead of words that love didn't mean sacrifice alone. That being whole made you better, not worse, at the things that truly mattered. Later, after Owen was asleep, Caleb stood in his son's doorway watching him breathe in the darkness. He thought about Sarah, about what she would have said if she could see him now. Probably something about taking long enough to figure it out. Probably something about being proud. And he thought about tomorrow, about walking into that satellite guidance meeting and proving he belonged there, about earning the trust of engineers who had no reason to believe in him yet, about building a new life that honored both the man he'd been and the father he'd become. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But for the first time since Sarah died, Caleb Moore felt ready to try. The conference room was already full when Caleb arrived at 8:55 the next morning. David Armstrong sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 6 other engineers, all focused on laptops and tablets displaying various technical schematics. The satellite guidance upgrade project had clearly been their world for months, and Caleb was about to step into it as an outsider with authority none of them had asked for. Marcus was waiting by the door. Ready? Not even a little bit. Good. Means you're taking it seriously. Marcus led him inside. Everyone, this is Caleb Moore, our new Senior Systems Integration Architect. He'll be reviewing the satellite project as his first assignment. David looked up, and Caleb saw the recognition flash across his face. The janitor. The man who'd solved the server crisis. David's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something carefully neutral. Mr. Moore, David said. Welcome to the team. Though I have to say, this is an interesting choice for a first assignment. We're pretty far along. Integration testing starts in 2 weeks. Which makes it the perfect time for a fresh perspective, Marcus said smoothly. Caleb, why don't you take a seat and observe today? Get a feel for where the project stands. Caleb sat at the far end of the table, pulling out his tablet to take notes. The meeting proceeded with the engineers discussing technical challenges he only partially understood: orbital mechanics, signal latency compensation, redundancy protocols for deep space communication. He listened carefully, trying to map the relationships between different system components, looking for the patterns that might reveal vulnerabilities. A younger engineer named Patricia Chen, no relation to Marcus apparently, was explaining a modification to the antenna array when Caleb noticed something in the diagram she'd displayed: a timing sequence that seemed slightly off, like two systems trying to synchronize on different rhythms. He made a note but said nothing. Too early to speak up. Too easy to be wrong when you didn't understand the full context yet. The meeting ran for 90 minutes. When it ended, the engineers filed out, talking among themselves. David lingered, approaching Caleb with what looked like forced politeness. "So you're the miracle worker who saved Project Sentinel," David said. "Victoria speaks very highly of you." "I got lucky spotting a detail others missed." "Luck." David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Is that what we're calling expertise now?" "Look, I'll be straight with you. I've been working on satellite guidance systems for 15 years. This project represents some of the most advanced work Helios has ever attempted. I don't need someone who used to clean offices telling me how to do my job." Caleb kept his voice even. "That's not what I'm here to do." "No. Then what exactly are you here to do?" "Ask questions. Look for integration issues between specializations. Help prevent the kind of system-level failures that happen when brilliant people work in isolation." Caleb met David's stare. "I'm not here to undermine you. I'm here to help you succeed. We're already succeeding. We're on schedule, under budget, and the preliminary tests have been flawless. Then my review should be straightforward. I'll confirm what you already know, and we'll all move forward confident the system is solid." David studied him for a long moment. "You really believe that? That you're going to walk in here after a few days and find problems we've missed after 8 months?" "I hope I don't find any problems. Honestly. But if I do, wouldn't you rather know now than after launch? Hypothetically, if you did find something, which you won't, how would you even know it was a real issue and not just you misunderstanding the architecture?" It was a fair question, and Caleb didn't have a perfect answer. "I guess we'd have to talk it through. Look at the evidence together. Make sure I'm not missing something obvious." David's expression softened slightly. "All right, that's reasonable. But I'm telling you right now, this system is sound. We've checked everything 6 ways from Sunday. I believe you, but humor me anyway." After David left, Marcus reappeared. "That went better than expected. He thinks I'm going to waste his time. He thinks you might find something he missed, which terrifies him. David's entire identity is wrapped up in being the expert. Having someone question his work feels like a personal attack." Marcus sat down across from Caleb. "But he's also smart enough to recognize that you solved a problem in 30 seconds that stumped 20 engineers. So he's conflicted. Give him time." Caleb spent the next 3 days buried in technical documentation, reviewing every aspect of the satellite guidance system. The architecture was impressive: layers of redundancy, sophisticated error correction, adaptive algorithms that could compensate for unexpected conditions. David's team had done excellent work, but that timing sequence Patricia had mentioned kept nagging at him. He pulled up the detailed specifications and started mapping out the signal flow, tracing how data moved through different system components. The satellite's primary guidance processor ran on a 40-millisecond update cycle. The backup processor used a 50-millisecond cycle for power efficiency. Under normal conditions, they ran independently, only syncing during failover events. Except there was a monitoring protocol that checked both processors continuously, comparing their calculations to detect anomalies. And that monitoring protocol ran on a 30-millisecond cycle. Caleb stared at the numbers, feeling his pulse quicken. 40, 50, 30. 3 different timing cycles with no common divisor, which meant every few seconds, the monitoring protocol would sample the processors at slightly different points in their calculation cycles, creating apparent discrepancies that weren't actually errors. He ran simulations on his computer, modeling what would happen over extended operation. For the first few hours, nothing. The system compensated automatically. But after sustained operation, say during a 3-month journey to Mars, those tiny timing mismatches would accumulate. Eventually, the monitoring protocol would flag so many false discrepancies that it might trigger an unnecessary failover. Or worse, it might ignore a real problem, because it had been crying wolf for weeks. Caleb sat back, rubbing his eyes. It was such a subtle issue, the kind of thing that wouldn't show up in ground testing because they never ran simulations long enough. But in actual deep space deployment, it could cripple the satellite's guidance system. He needed to be absolutely certain before saying anything. He spent another day running different scenarios, testing edge cases, looking for any possibility he was wrong. But every simulation confirmed the same conclusion. On Thursday morning, Caleb requested a meeting with David's team. They gathered in the same conference room, looking curious and slightly wary. "Thank you for taking the time," Caleb began. "I've been reviewing the guidance system architecture, and I think I've identified a potential integration issue. I want to walk through it with you to make sure I'm not misunderstanding something." David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Go ahead." Caleb pulled up his analysis on the main display. The primary and backup guidance processors run on different update cycles, 40 and 50 milliseconds respectively. The monitoring protocol that compares them runs on a 30 millisecond cycle. Over short duration, this works fine. But over extended operation, these timing mismatches create accumulated phase drift that could trigger false failover events. Patricia frowned, leaning forward to study the display. "Wait, the monitoring protocol samples both processors every 30 milliseconds? According to the specifications, yes. But that means..." She pulled up something on her own tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "Oh no, oh, that's bad." David's posture had changed from defensive to focused. "Show me the long-duration simulation." Caleb displayed the data. After 72 hours of continuous operation, the false discrepancy rate reached 12%. After a week, it was over 30%. After a month, the monitoring system was essentially useless, flagging so many phantom issues that real problems would be indistinguishable from noise. The room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. "How did we miss this?" one of the other engineers muttered. "Because we never ran simulations beyond 48 hours, David said quietly. His face had gone pale. "We tested the failover mechanism. We tested the monitoring protocol. We tested the processors independently. But we never modeled sustained operation with all three systems active simultaneously." He looked at Caleb. "This satellite is designed for an 18-month mission. If we'd launched with this architecture, it would have failed within weeks," Patricia finished. "The monitoring system would have degraded to uselessness, and if there was an actual guidance processor failure, we wouldn't know until the satellite started drifting off course." The magnitude of the catastrophe they'd narrowly avoided settled over the room like a physical weight. This wasn't just a failed project. This was a satellite worth hundreds of millions of dollars, carrying scientific instruments and communication equipment, potentially lost in space because of a timing cycle oversight. David stood abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the city. Nobody spoke. Caleb waited, giving him space to process. Finally, David turned back. "What's the fix?" "Synchronize all three systems to a common update cycle," Caleb said, "or redesign the monitoring protocol to account for the phase drift mathematically. Either approach would work. The first is simpler but might reduce power efficiency. The second maintains efficiency but adds computational complexity. How long to implement? Depends which approach you choose, and it's not my decision to make. This is your project. I'm just here to identify the issue." But David walked back to the table, bracing his hands against it. "I need to say something, and I need everyone to hear it." He looked around at his team, then at Caleb. "I was wrong about you. I thought you were here to make us look bad, to justify Victoria's pet hire, to score points by finding trivial issues we could argue away. Instead, you just saved us from a catastrophic failure that would have destroyed careers and wasted years of work." His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you. Genuinely. Thank you." Caleb felt his throat tighten. "I was just doing my job." "Your job is the only reason we still have jobs." David extended his hand. "I owe you an apology, and a hell of a lot of respect." Caleb shook his hand, feeling the firmness of the grip, the sincerity behind it. You don't owe me anything. Your team did amazing work. This was just a subtle integration issue that's easy to miss when you're focused on individual components. Still, I was an ass to you, and you saved us anyway. The meeting continued for another 2 hours as the team debated the best approach to fixing the timing issue. Caleb participated but mostly listened, letting them own the solution. By the end, they'd decided on a hybrid approach, synchronizing the processors to a common 40-millisecond cycle while adding mathematical drift compensation to the monitoring protocol as a backup safeguard. When the meeting finally broke up, Patricia approached Caleb. "Can I ask you something? How did you even think to check the timing cycles? Most people would focus on the algorithms or the hardware specs." Caleb thought about that. "I guess I just look at systems differently. I don't see individual components. I see relationships, data flows, timing dependencies, the way different parts interact over time." That's exactly what we needed. Someone who could see the forest. She smiled. "I'm glad you're here." Even if David was too stubborn to admit it at first, word of Caleb's discovery spread through the engineering department faster than he would have liked. By the afternoon, people he'd never met were stopping by his office to congratulate him or ask technical questions about other projects. It was overwhelming and humbling in equal measure. Victoria summoned him to her office at 4. "I hear you just saved the satellite project from disaster," she said as soon as he walked in. "I found a timing issue. The team will fix it." "Caleb," Victoria's voice was gentle but firm, "you can be humble without being dishonest. David called me personally to say you caught a critical flaw that would have resulted in complete mission failure. Those were his exact words. Complete mission failure. I got lucky again. Twice in 2 weeks isn't luck, it's skill." She gestured for him to sit. "How are you adjusting? Is the work-life balance working out?" "So far, yes. I've been home every day by 3:30. Owen and I have been doing his science fair project in the evenings. It feels sustainable." "Good, because I want to expand your role. Not your hours," she added quickly, seeing his expression, "but your scope. I want you reviewing all major projects at critical integration points. You have a gift for seeing failure modes before they manifest. That's invaluable. What if I don't find issues in every project? What if the satellite thing was just unusual? Then you confirm the work is solid and give teams confidence to proceed. That's still valuable." Victoria leaned forward. "But between us, I think you're going to find issues. Not because the engineers are incompetent, but because integration failures are subtle and insidious. They hide in the gaps between specializations, and you're uniquely qualified to spot them." Caleb left her office feeling the weight of new expectations. He was no longer just trying to prove he could do the job. He was becoming essential to how Helios operated. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. That evening, Owen wanted to hear every detail about the satellite project. They sat at the kitchen table while Caleb tried to explain timing cycles and phase drift in terms an 8-year-old could understand. "So basically, they were running on different clocks and didn't realize it would cause problems?" Owen asked. "Exactly. Like if we tried to meet up but my watch was 5 minutes fast and yours was 5 minutes slow. At first it seems fine, but over time we'd keep missing each other." That's actually pretty simple. How did all those engineers not see it? Because they were focused on making sure each clock worked perfectly. Nobody was thinking about how the clocks related to each other. Owen nodded seriously. "You're good at the relating part, at seeing how things connect." "I guess I am." Is that because of Mom? Because you had to learn how to connect things when she was sick? Like connecting doctor stuff and home stuff and me stuff all at once? The observation hit Caleb like a physical blow. He stared at his son, amazed and heartbroken by the insight. "Maybe. I never thought about it that way. Mrs. Chen says hard things teach us stuff. She says her husband dying taught her to appreciate small moments. Maybe Mom being sick taught you to see connections other people miss." Caleb pulled Owen into a hug, holding him tight. "You're too smart for your own good. You know that?" "I know," Owen said, his voice muffled against Caleb's chest. "It's genetic." Over the next 2 weeks, Caleb reviewed 3 more projects. He found minor issues in 2 of them, nothing catastrophic, but optimization opportunities that improved performance and reliability. The 3rd project was solid. And he told the team exactly that, earning their gratitude for not inventing problems where none existed. His reputation grew. Engineers started seeking his input voluntarily, asking him to review designs before committing to major decisions. He became known as someone who could be trusted to give honest feedback without ego or politics, who celebrated good work as readily as he identified flaws. But the real test came when Victoria assigned him to review the Autonomous Vehicle Guidance Platform, a joint project with a major automotive manufacturer that represented Helios's expansion into civilian markets. The project lead was a woman named Dr. Sarah Winters, and the coincidence of her first name made Caleb's chest ache every time he heard it. He met with her team on a Wednesday morning. Dr. Winters was intense and brilliant, with a rapid-fire speaking style that suggested her thoughts moved faster than her words could capture them. She walked Caleb through the vehicle guidance architecture with the confidence of someone who'd dedicated years to perfecting it. The core innovation is distributed processing, she explained, displaying a complex diagram. Instead of a central guidance computer, we have 6 independent processors distributed throughout the vehicle. Each handles a specific domain: visual recognition, radar interpretation, route planning, collision avoidance, passenger comfort optimization, and system health monitoring. They communicate via a high-speed mesh network, sharing data and coordinating decisions in real time. It was elegant, sophisticated, and potentially dangerous in ways Caleb needed time to fully understand. He spent a week studying the system, running simulations, modeling edge cases. The distributed architecture was brilliant for redundancy and processing power, but it created communication complexity that centralized systems didn't face. What happened if the mesh network experienced partial failure? What if some processors could communicate but others couldn't? How did the system handle conflicting recommendations from different domains? The specifications addressed these scenarios, but the solutions felt incomplete. Caleb dug deeper, eventually discovering what he'd feared: a category of network failure that the system couldn't handle gracefully. If the collision avoidance processor lost connection to exactly 3 other processors in a specific pattern, it would default to maximum caution mode. Simultaneously, if the route planning processor lost connection to the same 3 processors, it would default to maximum efficiency mode, assuming other systems were monitoring for hazards. In that specific scenario, the vehicle would try to navigate with maximum speed while the collision avoidance system tried to stop it. The conflicting commands would create erratic behavior, alternating acceleration and braking that could cause accidents or, at minimum, trigger motion sickness in passengers. Caleb brought his findings to Dr. Winters on a Monday morning, requesting a private meeting before presenting to the full team. She listened to his explanation with increasing alarm. "What's the probability of this specific failure pattern?" she asked when he finished. "Low. Maybe 1 in 10,000 network disruptions. But over millions of vehicles in operation over years, it becomes inevitable." "And when it happens?" "Best case, the vehicle behaves erratically until the network recovers or a manual override engages. Worst case, it causes an accident." Dr. Winters closed her eyes. "We're scheduled to begin road testing in 3 weeks. The automotive manufacturer has committed billions to this partnership. If I tell them we need to delay for a redesign, I'm not telling you to delay. I'm telling you about a failure mode you need to address. How and when you address it is your decision." She opened her eyes, looking at him with something between gratitude and resentment. "You're making this very difficult." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be. You're doing exactly what Victoria hired you to do." Dr. Winters stood and paced to her office window. "The fix isn't simple, is it?" "No, you need to redesign the fail-safe protocols to account for partial network failures with conflicting defaults. That requires changing the core communication architecture, which affects every processor, every domain, every integration point." She turned back to face him. "Weeks of work, maybe months." "Probably, but it's necessary." Dr. Winters was quiet for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called someone. "This is Sarah Winters. I need to schedule a meeting with the automotive partnership team, today if possible. We have a critical safety issue that needs to be addressed before road testing." She listened, then said firmly, "I understand they're not going to be happy, But they'll be a lot less happy if we discover this problem after vehicles are on the road. Make it happen." After she hung up, she looked at Caleb with exhausted respect. "I should hate you right now. You just torpedoed months of careful scheduling and political negotiation, but instead I'm grateful, because you're right, this could have killed people." "I wish I'd been wrong." "Me too." She managed a small smile. "But you weren't, and now we get to do the hard work of fixing it. Welcome to the team, Mr. Moore. You've earned your salary twice over." That evening, Caleb got home to find Owen in tears at the kitchen table, his science fair project scattered in pieces. Hey, what happened?" Caleb dropped his bag and knelt beside his son. "I dropped it. The whole model just fell apart. The science fair is in 3 days and I ruined everything." Owen's face was blotchy with crying. Caleb examined the damage. The model demonstrating phototropism, a carefully constructed setup with plants and movable light sources, had indeed broken, but not beyond repair. "Okay, it's okay. We can fix this." "There's not enough time." "There's always enough time if we work together. Come on." Caleb cleared the table and laid out the pieces systematically. "Let's assess what's actually broken versus what just needs to be reassembled." They worked side by side for the next 2 hours, carefully reconstructing the model. Owen's tears dried as they progressed, replaced by focused determination. Caleb showed him how to reinforce the weak joints, how to test stability before adding the next component, how to turn a disaster into an opportunity for improvement. "There," Caleb said finally, "actually stronger than before." Owen tested the mechanism, moving the light source and watching the plant model respond. "It works. It really works." "Of course it does. We're a good team." Owen hugged him fiercely. "Thanks, Dad. I thought it was completely ruined." "Nothing's ever completely ruined. Sometimes things breaking is how we learn to build them better." Later, after Owen was asleep, Caleb sat in his living room thinking about that statement, about things breaking and learning to build better, about Sarah's death shattering the life he'd built, and how he'd spent 3 years trying to survive in the wreckage instead of rebuilding, about how he was finally learning to build again. Not the same structure that was gone forever, but something new, something that honored what he'd lost while creating space for what might still be possible. His phone buzzed, a text from Victoria. "Heard about the autonomous vehicle issue. Sarah Winters says you may have saved lives. The partnership team isn't happy about the delay, but they understand it's necessary. Well done." Caleb stared at the message for a long time. Well done. 2 simple words that meant he was doing more than surviving. He was contributing, making a difference, using skills he'd thought were buried forever. He typed a response. "Just doing the job. Thanks for the opportunity." But what he really wanted to say was, "Thank you for seeing me when I'd made myself invisible. Thank you for refusing to let me stay small. Thank you for believing I could be both a father and an engineer when I'd convinced myself those things were mutually exclusive." He sent the simple response instead and put his phone away. Outside, Seattle glittered in the darkness, alive with possibility. And inside his small apartment, surrounded by his son's science project and the quiet evidence of a life being rebuilt piece by careful piece, Caleb Moore allowed himself to believe that broken things really could become stronger than they were before. 3 months into his new role, Caleb stood in the back of the auditorium, watching Owen present his phototropism project to a panel of science fair judges. The model worked flawlessly, the miniature plant responding to the light source exactly as designed. Owen's presentation was confident and clear, explaining the biological mechanisms with the precision of someone who'd practiced dozens of times in front of his father. When Owen finished, one of the judges asked, "Did you have help building this?" Owen nodded. "My dad helped me rebuild it after I dropped it, but the idea was mine, and he taught me that when things break, you can make them stronger than before." The judge smiled and made a note on her clipboard. Caleb felt pride swell in his chest so powerfully it almost hurt. This was what mattered, not the engineering triumphs or the projects saved. This moment, watching his son stand tall and speak with confidence about work they'd done together. Owen won second place in his age category. On the drive home, he held the ribbon like it was made of gold, talking nonstop about the other projects and which ones he thought deserved awards. Caleb listened, offering observations and celebrating Owen's achievement, feeling more present than he had in years. But that presence was being tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. The success of his integration reviews had made him increasingly valuable to Helios, and with value came pressure. Victoria wanted him involved in more projects. Teams sought his input on decisions large and small. His flexible schedule was becoming less flexible as meeting requests multiplied. The tension came to a head on a Thursday afternoon when Marcus called an emergency meeting about a critical satellite deployment scheduled for the following week. Caleb was supposed to pick up Owen from school in 20 minutes. "I can't stay," Caleb said, gathering his things. "I have to get Owen." "This will only take an hour," Marcus said. "The launch window is firm. We need your review before final approval." "Then you'll have it tomorrow morning, but I can't miss pickup." Marcus looked frustrated. "Caleb, I understand your commitments, but this is a billion-dollar satellite. An hour of your time could prevent catastrophic failure. And being unreliable for my son could cause damage no amount of money can fix." Caleb stood firm. "Tomorrow morning, first thing. I'll work late tonight after Owen's asleep if necessary, but I'm not breaking my promise to him." He left the conference room aware of the eyes following him, the whispered conversations about whether the genius engineer was too inflexible, too unavailable when it truly mattered. The doubt crept in during the drive to Owen's school. Was he being selfish? Was he prioritizing his own need to be present over work that actually affected people's lives and livelihoods? Owen climbed into the car, chattering about a math test he'd aced. Caleb pushed the doubts aside and focused on his son, asking questions and celebrating the small victory. Later that night, after Owen was asleep, Caleb reviewed the satellite deployment specifications until 2 in the morning, finding and documenting 3 potential issues that needed addressing before launch. He sent his analysis to Marcus at 2:15 with a note. "Review complete. Available to discuss at 7 a.m. if needed. And I'm sorry for leaving abruptly, but I'm not sorry for the choice." Marcus's response came at 6 the next morning. "Don't apologize. You were right. We adjusted the meeting and found solutions to all 3 issues you identified. The satellite is sound, and your son is lucky to have a father who keeps his promises." The words helped, but the underlying tension remained. Caleb was walking a tightrope between 2 equally important commitments, and he knew eventually something would have to give. That breaking point arrived in the form of an opportunity he'd never expected. Victoria called him into her office on a Monday morning with an expression that was part excitement and part apology. "I've been approached by the Department of Defense," she said without preamble. "They want to offer you a position as Chief Systems Architect for a classified aerospace project. It's the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime." Caleb felt his stomach drop. "I'm not interested." "I told them you'd say that, but they insisted I at least present the offer." She slid a folder across her desk. "The salary is triple what you're making here. Full government benefits. And most importantly, they're willing to structure the role around your parenting schedule. Remote work, flexible hours, childcare support. They've done their homework on you, Caleb. They know what you need." "Then they should also know I walked away from this world for a reason." That was different. That was when your wife was dying, and you had to choose between her and your career. Victoria's voice was gentle. "Sarah's gone. Owen is older, more independent, and this project could advance aerospace technology by a decade. They specifically requested you because of your integration expertise. Apparently, word of your work here has reached some very influential people." Caleb opened the folder despite himself. The project details were heavily redacted, but the scope was clear. Next-generation satellite systems with implications for both civilian and defense applications. The kind of work he'd dreamed about early in his career, before life had taught him that dreams could be crushed by tragedy. "I don't belong in that world anymore," he said quietly. "Why not? Because you chose to be a father first? That doesn't disqualify you from significant work. If anything, it qualifies you better. You understand priorities. You understand sacrifice. You understand that the most important systems aren't technological, they're human." "Victoria, I'm not trying to get rid of you. Selfishly, I want you to stay at Helios. You've become essential to how we operate." She leaned forward. "But I also care about you as a person, and I think you're still limiting yourself, Still convinced you have to choose between being a father and being an engineer at the highest level. This offer proves you don't. Someone is willing to structure a position around your needs because your skills are that valuable. What if I fail? What if I take the job and discover I can't handle the pressure, can't balance everything, can't be the engineer they need while still being the father Owen deserves? Then you'll have tried, and you'll know. And that's better than spending the rest of your life wondering what if. Victoria stood and walked to her window. When my father died, he left me a letter. One line has stayed with me for 20 years. He wrote, "The only real failure is refusing to attempt the things that scare you because you might not be perfect at them. You don't have to be perfect, Caleb. You just have to try." Caleb took the folder home that night and left it on the kitchen counter while he helped Owen with homework and made dinner and went through their evening routine. But it sat there like a challenge, like a question he wasn't ready to answer. After Owen went to bed, Caleb called the only person whose opinion he truly trusted. Mrs. Chen answered on the third ring. "Caleb, is everything all right? I need advice. Can I come over?" 5 minutes later, he was sitting in her living room, surrounded by her paintings, colorful abstracts that had multiplied since she'd started creating again after her husband's death. He explained the offer, the opportunity, the fear. Mrs. Chen listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Do you remember what I told you months ago?" she asked finally. "About grief not being a reason to stop living?" "Yes. I think you've been doing better. Taking the job at Helios was brave, but I think you're still holding back, still convinced that truly reaching for something means abandoning Owen." She leaned forward. "Let me ask you something. If Owen came to you in 10 years and said he had an amazing opportunity but was afraid to take it because it might mean less time with his own family, what would you tell him?" "I'd tell him that balance is possible, that meaningful work and meaningful relationships don't have to be mutually exclusive. And would you believe yourself? Or would he see through it, knowing his father never took his own advice?" The words hit like a hammer. Caleb stared at her, feeling layers of self-deception peel away. "Owen is watching you," Mrs. Chen continued, "learning from you, not just from what you say, but from what you do. If you teach him that pursuing excellence means sacrificing family, or that family means sacrificing excellence, what kind of life are you preparing him for? I just want him to know he's my priority." He already knows, because you show him every single day, picking him up from school, helping with homework, being present. She smiled. But he also needs to know that loving him doesn't mean making yourself smaller, that being his father and being fully yourself can coexist. That might be the most important lesson you ever teach him. Caleb drove home with her words echoing in his mind. He found Owen awake, reading in bed with a flashlight. "You're supposed to be asleep," Caleb said. "Couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." Owen set down his book. "Is something wrong? You seem worried." Caleb sat on the edge of the bed. "I got offered a new job, a really important one. But it would be challenging. More pressure, more responsibility." "Do you want it?" "Part of me does. The part that used to dream big before—" He trailed off. "Before Mom died," Owen finished. "You can say it, Dad. It doesn't hurt me when you talk about her." "It hurts me sometimes." "I know, but maybe that's okay. Maybe some things should hurt because they mattered so much." Owen sat up, crossing his legs. "Do you think Mom would want you to take the job?" Caleb thought about Sarah, about her fierce belief in his capabilities, about the way she'd encouraged his ambitions even when it meant less time together. "Yeah, she would push me to take it. She always believed I could do more than I thought I could." "Then maybe you should listen to her, even if she's not here to say it herself." "What about you? How would you feel if I was busier, more stressed, less available sometimes?" Owen considered this seriously. "I'd feel proud, because my dad would be doing something important, and I'd still know I mattered because you always keep your promises. You always pick me up from school. You always help with homework. You're always there when I really need you." He reached out and took Caleb's hand. "I don't need you every second of every day, Dad. I just need to know that when it counts, you'll be there. And you always are." Caleb pulled his son into a hug, overwhelmed by the wisdom and maturity Owen showed. 8 years old and already understanding what Caleb had struggled with for years. That presence wasn't about constant availability, but about showing up for the moments that truly mattered. "When did you get so smart?" Caleb asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you. Good genetics." The next morning, Caleb called the Department of Defense contact listed in the folder. The conversation was brief and professional. He accepted the position with clear conditions about his schedule and priorities. They agreed without hesitation, confirming Victoria's assessment that his skills were valuable enough to accommodate his needs. Then he went to Victoria's office and gave his notice, though not in the traditional sense. "I'm taking the Defense Department position," he told her. "But I want you to know that working here changed my life. You saw something in me when I'd made myself invisible. You refused to let me stay small. You gave me the chance to remember who I was while learning who I could become." Victoria smiled, though her eyes were slightly damp. "You did that yourself. I just opened the door. You walked through it. Still, thank you for everything. Thank you for saving my company multiple times." She stood and extended her hand. "Stay in touch. And if the Defense Department doesn't treat you right, you always have a home here." Caleb's last day at Helios Dynamics fell on a Friday. The engineering department threw him a goodbye lunch, and the number of people who showed up surprised him. David Armstrong gave a speech about how Caleb had taught him that ego was the enemy of excellence. Dr. Sarah Winters thanked him for preventing catastrophic failures with grace and humility. Jennifer Kwan admitted she'd been wrong to doubt him initially, but the moment that meant the most came from Mitchell, the junior engineer whose monitoring loop had started everything. He approached Caleb after the speeches, looking nervous. "I just wanted to say that the way you handled my mistake changed how I think about engineering," Mitchell said. "You could have made me feel incompetent. Instead, you made me feel like someone with potential who'd made an instructive error. That's the kind of engineer I want to be, the kind of leader I want to be." "You already are," Caleb said. "Keep asking questions. Keep trying to add value. Keep learning from mistakes instead of hiding them. You're going to do great things." That evening, Caleb and Owen celebrated with pizza and a movie. Halfway through, Owen paused it and turned to his father. "Are you scared about the new job?" "Terrified." "Good. Mrs. Chen says being scared means you're doing something that matters." "Mrs. Chen is full of wisdom." "I know. She says she learned it from making mistakes and living long enough to fix them." Owen smiled. "You're going to be great, Dad. I know it." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're my dad, and my dad is really good at fixing things, even when they seem completely broken." Caleb's new position began the following Monday. The work was indeed challenging, complex aerospace systems that pushed the boundaries of current technology. But the structure they'd promised held true. He worked from home 3 days a week, came into the secure facility for meetings and critical reviews the other 2 days, and maintained his schedule of picking up Owen from school every single day. The projects he contributed to were classified, so he couldn't share specifics even with Owen. But he could share the feeling of intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of solving complex problems, the sense that his work mattered in tangible ways. More importantly, he could show Owen what it looked like to pursue meaningful work without sacrificing what truly mattered, to be fully present during family time and fully engaged during work time, to maintain boundaries without apology and meet responsibilities without excuse. 6 months into the new position, Caleb received a letter that made his hands shake when he opened it. The return address was from the National Aerospace Council. Inside was a commendation for his contributions to satellite guidance systems, with specific reference to integration improvements that had prevented multiple mission failures across both government and civilian projects. The letter was signed by officials whose names Caleb recognized from his early career, people he'd once admired from a distance. He showed it to Owen that evening. "That's really cool," Owen said, reading it carefully. "Does this mean you're famous now?" "It means some people think I do good work. That's all." "Dad, you saved a bunch of satellites from crashing. That's more than good work. That's hero work." "I'm not a hero. I'm just an engineer who pays attention to details." Owen looked at him with an expression that seemed far older than 9 years. "You're my hero, not because you saved satellites, because when everything fell apart and you could have given up, you didn't. You took care of me. And then when you could have stayed safe and hidden, You didn't do that either. You came back. You let yourself be whole again. Caleb felt tears prick his eyes. When did you learn to say things like that? I've been practicing. There's this really important speech competition at school, and I've been working on my speech about inspiration. It's about you. Me? Yeah, about how real strength isn't being perfect. It's falling apart and putting yourself back together differently. Better. Owen handed back the letter. You should frame this. Put it on your wall at work. Let people see what you've accomplished. I'll think about it. But later that night, after Owen was asleep, Caleb did frame the letter. Not for display at work, but for his home office, a small room he'd carved out of the apartment for the days he worked remotely. He hung it on the wall next to a drawing Owen had made in first grade, when Sarah was still alive and the future had looked completely different. The juxtaposition felt right. Recognition for professional excellence next to evidence of what truly mattered, both important, both real, both part of who he was. A year after taking the Defense Department position, Caleb was invited to speak at a conference on systems integration and complex aerospace architectures. He almost declined. Public speaking had never been his strength, and the thought of standing in front of hundreds of engineers was paralyzing, but Owen convinced him to accept. You have important things to say, Owen insisted, about how different parts of systems need to work together, and about how people need to work together too. The conference was in San Francisco, requiring Caleb to be away for 2 nights. He arranged for Mrs. Chen to stay with Owen, triple-checked that Owen had everything he needed, and left detailed emergency contact information. On the morning of his presentation, Caleb stood backstage feeling nauseated with nervousness. His phone buzzed with a text from Owen. You're going to be amazing. Just remember, you're not telling them what they want to hear. You're telling them what they need to know. Love you, Dad. Caleb walked onto the stage to polite applause, faced the audience of several hundred engineers and aerospace professionals, and began to speak. He talked about integration failures and why they happened, about the gaps between specializations where critical issues hid, about the importance of cross-disciplinary thinking and humble questioning. But he also talked about something deeper, about how the best engineers understood that technical systems were designed by and for humans, and that ignoring the human element led to failures no amount of technical brilliance could prevent. I spent 3 years working as a janitor, he said, watching surprise ripple through the audience. I cleaned the offices of brilliant engineers while they solved complex problems. And I learned something important during that time. I learned that every person in a building has value, regardless of their title or paycheck. The maintenance worker who notices a server room running hot. The administrative assistant who spots a scheduling conflict before it becomes a crisis. The security guard who catches an unusual access pattern. He paused, making eye contact with people in the front rows. We build systems to be robust and reliable, but too often we forget that the most important system is the human one. The network of people who observe, question, communicate, and collaborate. If that system fails, if we create cultures where only certain voices are heard, where title determines whose observations matter, where ego prevents us from listening to uncomfortable truths, then all our technical sophistication won't save us from failure. The presentation ended to sustained applause. Afterward, dozens of people approached him with questions and comments. But the conversation that mattered most came from a young woman who waited until everyone else had left. My name is Rebecca Torres, she said. I'm a junior engineer at a major contractor, and I've been feeling invisible for 2 years, like my observations don't matter because I'm new and young and haven't earned the right to speak up. Tears gathered in her eyes. Your talk made me realize that visibility isn't something people grant you. It's something you claim by having the courage to speak up when you see something that matters. Caleb felt his throat tighten. You're absolutely right. And for what it's worth, your observations matter, especially the ones that make senior engineers uncomfortable. Those are usually the most important. Thank you for the presentation and for being honest about your own journey. It helps to know that even brilliant engineers sometimes have to remember their own value. Flying home that evening, Caleb reflected on how far he'd come from the man who'd knocked on that conference room door 16 months ago. He'd been so certain then that visibility meant vulnerability, that mattering to people beyond his son meant risking the stability they'd built together. Now he understood that the opposite was true. Hiding himself, making himself small, had been the real risk, not to his stability, but to his wholeness. And teaching Owen that love required self-erasure would have been the cruelest lesson of all. Owen met him at the apartment door when he arrived home, practically vibrating with excitement. "How'd it go? Did they love it? Did you tell them about being a janitor?" "I did, and they seemed to appreciate it. I knew they would. Mrs. Chen recorded the live stream. We watched it together. You were so good, Dad, so confident." "I was terrified the whole time." "Being brave and being scared are the same thing. That's what you taught me." Owen hugged him tightly. "I'm really proud of you." Those words, from his 9-year-old son, meant more than any professional accolade could ever match. The years that followed brought continued growth and change. Owen grew from a boy into a young man, his interests expanding from science fair projects to robotics competitions to dreams of studying aerospace engineering himself. Caleb's career flourished, his reputation as someone who could see system-level failures before they manifested, leading to consulting opportunities and advisory positions. But the real measure of success wasn't in projects saved or recognition earned. It was in the life they'd built together, father and son, both whole, both growing, both showing up fully for each other and for themselves. On Owen's 16th birthday, they stood together in front of Sarah's grave for the first time in years. Caleb had avoided this place, the pain too raw, the loss too immediate, but Owen had asked to visit and Caleb had agreed. "I wish she could see you now," Caleb said quietly, looking at the simple headstone. "You'd make her so proud." "She can see us," Owen said. "I really believe that, and I think she's proud of both of us. Not just me growing up, but you coming back to life." Coming back to life. That's one way to put it. It's the right way. You were alive after she died, but you weren't really living, just existing, going through motions. Owen put his arm around Caleb's shoulders. When had he gotten tall enough to do that? Now you're living again, being yourself, doing work that matters. That's what she would have wanted. They stood in silence for a while, remembering. Then Owen said something that made Caleb's breath catch. "I'm going to apply to MIT for aerospace engineering. I know it's a reach, but I want to try." "That's wonderful. You do great there." "I know I'll be far from home, and I know it might be hard for you, being alone after we've been a team for so long." Owen turned to face him. "But I think you'll be okay, because you're not the person you were when Mom died. You're not someone who needs to hide anymore. You're someone who knows how to be whole." Caleb pulled his son into a hug, overwhelmed by pride and love and the bittersweet recognition that he'd succeeded at the most important job of his life, raising a young man who was ready to pursue his own dreams, confident that his father would be fine. "I'll be more than okay," Caleb said. "I'll be cheering you on every step of the way." Owen did get into MIT. Caleb helped him pack for college with a mixture of pride and heartbreak, watching his son prepare to step into independence. On the drive to the airport, they talked about everything and nothing, both aware that their daily rhythm was about to change forever. At the security checkpoint, Owen turned to hug him one more time. "Thank you, Dad, for everything. For being there when it mattered. For showing me what it means to be strong without being hard. For teaching me that love and excellence aren't opposites. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going when I wanted to give up. For being patient while I figured out how to be whole again. For being exactly who you are." "I love you, Dad." "I love you too, Owen. So much." Caleb watched his son walk through security, turn back one more time to wave, then disappear into the crowd of travelers. He stood there for a long time, feeling the weight of 18 years of single parenthood lift and settle into something different, not lighter, but transformed into pride and accomplishment and trust that he'd done his job well. Driving home alone, Caleb thought about the journey that had brought him here. From aerospace engineer to broken widower, to invisible janitor, to integration architect, to father, sending his son off to pursue dreams that echoed his own. The path had been circuitous and painful and surprising, but it had led him to this moment of bittersweet completion. His phone rang, Victoria Hale calling from a number he still had saved. "I heard Owen got into MIT," she said. "Congratulations. You must be incredibly proud." "I am, terrified and proud in equal measure." That means you did it right. The goal was never to keep him dependent. It was to help him become independent. Victoria paused. Listen, I'm calling because I have a proposition. Helios is expanding our aerospace division, and I want you to head it. Not as a reviewer, but as a leader. Building teams, setting vision, mentoring the next generation of engineers. Caleb smiled. You never stop trying, do you? Not when I see potential being underutilized. You've spent years preventing failures. Maybe it's time to create successes, to build something instead of just protecting what others have built. Let me think about it. Take all the time you need. But Caleb, whatever you decide, know that you've already succeeded at the thing that matters most. Owen is remarkable, and that's because you showed him what it looks like to be fully human, flawed and growing and courageous enough to change. After they hung up, Caleb sat in his car outside his apartment building, thinking about Victoria's offer, about building instead of protecting, about leading instead of consulting, about the next chapter of a life that had already been rewritten more times than he'd thought possible. He thought about Sarah, who'd believed in his capabilities even when he couldn't see them himself, about Owen, who'd given him purpose when grief had threatened to consume him, about Mrs. Chen and Victoria and all the people who'd refused to let him stay invisible when visibility felt like vulnerability. And he thought about the man he'd become, not the engineer he'd been before tragedy struck, and not the broken janitor who'd pushed a cleaning cart through the halls of Helios Dynamics, but someone new. Someone who'd learned that wholeness wasn't about being unbroken, but about putting the pieces back together in new configurations. Someone who understood that the most important integrations weren't technological, but human. Someone who'd discovered that choosing love didn't mean abandoning purpose, and pursuing excellence didn't require sacrificing what truly mattered. Caleb picked up his phone and called Victoria back. I'll take the position, he said, on one condition. Name it. I want to create mentorship programs for people who feel invisible. Administrative staff, maintenance workers, junior engineers, anyone who has insights but doesn't feel heard. If I'm going to lead a division, I want to build a culture where everyone's observations matter. Victoria laughed, a sound of pure delight. You're going to revolutionize how we operate, aren't you? I'm going to try. That's all any of us can do. Caleb walked into his empty apartment, truly empty now, without Owen's presence filling the spaces, and looked around at the life they'd built together. The photos on the walls, the chess set on the table, the evidence of 18 years spent showing up, being present, choosing love over ambition, and then learning that love could include ambition. On his desk sat the framed commendation from the National Aerospace Council, next to Owen's first-grade drawing, next to a photo of Sarah holding newborn Owen in the hospital. A triptych of past and present, loss and growth, the person he'd been and the person he'd become. Caleb sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He had work to do, a division to build, a culture to change, a future to create that honored everything he'd learned from being invisible and everything he'd gained from allowing himself to be seen again. Outside his window, Seattle glowed in the twilight, alive with possibility. And inside his apartment, surrounded by the quiet evidence of a life rebuilt piece by careful piece, Caleb Moore began to write the vision statement for his new division. It started with a simple premise, that the best systems were built by people who understood that everyone had value, that visibility was a right, not a privilege, and that the measure of true leadership was whether you lifted others up or kept them small. He wrote late into the night, fueled by coffee and purpose, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that broken things really could become stronger than they were before. That grief didn't have to be the end of the story. That choosing to be whole again wasn't betraying what you'd lost, but honoring it. And that the invisible janitor who'd once pushed a cleaning cart through the halls of Helios Dynamics had always been an engineer at heart. He just needed to remember that using his gifts didn't mean abandoning his love, and that the greatest integration of all was learning to be both a father and fully himself. The story didn't end with a grand gesture or a dramatic transformation. It ended the way real growth always ends, with a person sitting alone in a quiet room doing work that mattered, knowing they'd be there tomorrow to pick up where they'd left off, showing up not because they had to, but because they'd finally understood that presence and purpose could coexist, that love and excellence weren't opposites, that you could be whole, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't saving a billion-dollar company or preventing catastrophic failure. It was simply allowing yourself to matter again.